Okay, so welcome everybody. This is our first time doing this, so you guys bear with us for having it, if it's not quite as well as we want it to be. Basically today what we want to do, this is a 1-hour session, and we just want to go through really quickly together, reestablish the rationale for why we need strong relationships with students, but most importantly, and the majority of the time, to identify those types of strategies that we can do immediately with kids to get them in and to connect with them so that they know that people are with them. And hold on a second, I'm trying to figure out where the chat is. All right, so we're going to begin and end on time. Like I said, it's a 1-hour session. We ask that you guys stay focused. There will be opportunities in order to ask questions and absolutely to share ideas. That's the whole point of today. Be respectful of everybody else's, as we always are. Assume positive intent. Everybody on this webinar is here because they absolutely want to do the best for the kids and try to figure out what that looks like as we try to navigate this new world that we're living in at the moment. We're going to ask you to use the chat feature for questions and responses. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then to mute your microphone when not speaking, please, just so we don't have that feedback that happens sometimes. So, we're going to ask you to share your questions and ideas in the chat box and as well as use it as a back channel. For those of you guys who this may be your first webinar, back channeling essentially means that you guys are having sidebars, which typically in a person-to-person PD, we are like, please. But today we're absolutely wanting you guys to do that. That is a really great way to share ideas from each other. If you notice at the very bottom of your screen, you should see an icon that says chat. And if you click on that, that will open up the chat window for you. And in just a few moments, I'm going to ask you guys to write something so we can practice that. The questions will be tracked and responded to as we can. Either at logical pausing points or at the Q&A session at the end. And if it's something where we're not exactly able to answer it during this 1 hour, then we'll absolutely have a follow-up communication with you so that we can be responsive to everybody. And lastly, just to let you know, the chat will be saved so that we can follow up on any unanswered questions, as well as one of the things that Randy and I have committed to doing is to compile additional resources and ideas and then distribute that to you all as we go through. All right, so let's get to our warm-up and try the chat here. So what we're going to ask you guys to do today for the warm-up is, is to write in the chat box your name, and then how would you describe your internal weather today? And if you notice, you'll be able to click send to everyone, and that way everybody will be able to see the responses. So your name, and then how would you describe your internal weather today? I'm seeing quite a few drizzles, but then quite a few sunnies, so that's good. Okay. Always nice to know your internal weather is sunny and bright. I agree. All right. So that's the way that you guys can use the Zoom chat so that we can continue to share ideas back and forth and respond to each other. I know it's a little bit different than when we're in person, but it's a good way to do it when we're trying to have quite a few people at once to talk. So why student-teacher relationships? You know, one of the things is we all could write a dissertation about why it's important. And we know this, we're educators. And one of the things that I read just actually earlier today is that idea that even though we are superstars, we are in a new world that we have not really had a lot of experience with. Even if we've used Google Classroom before or anything like that, this is a ball game. And I don't know if any of you guys remember the Nike commercial from way back when with Bo Jackson, where Bo Jackson was a great athlete who could do almost every sport. And in the commercial, he finally ended up in the ice rink with Wayne Gretzky and could not skate worth a darn. He kept falling down and everything. And Wayne Gretzky was just like, no. And I feel sometimes like that's what we're at. We are superstars. We know how to do the classroom. We're in and now we're like trying to skate when we've never done it before. So that's why having these kind of conversations is so critical for us. So we're going to start in terms of thinking about the why with the brain. And we're just going to go over this really quickly. The three parts of the brain that we wanted to just really quickly focus on today are the prefrontal cortex, where the kids regulate their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Some of them do this better than others already. The hippocampus, which really stores the learning and memory. That's the biggest part that's highlighted and worked on throughout the day when they're in school. And then the amygdala, which in all of us is what reacts to stress and the emotional arousal. Well, that's our fight or flight. And that's usually how our brain works. But when we are really under stress, we have a stress hormone called cortisol, which just floods our brain. And it actually doesn't just flood it, but it changes the structure and the function of our brain so that we're primed to be in high alert. We react quickly. We don't always react the way we should. And all of our emphasis is on trying to regulate our emotions, trying to regulate that attention. And so learning and memory, the hippocampus is just not working like it should. So we really have to try to figure out what can we do. And luckily there's an antidote for that, and that is oxytocin. So today what we really want to think about is how do we as educators try to pump some oxytocin into our kids. And that way then it's an antidote to that stress. We can't get rid of all stress. The kids are worried about if they know somebody with COVID-19. They worry about, some of them, about getting food. If their parents are still working, their parents have to leave the house, or if their parents aren't working, they're worried in that way. But there are some things that we can do to help support the kids. And so that's where we want to think about today, is what some of those small things we can do. And real quickly then, when we think about our educators, that's where we come in. In one of the books, Relationship Matters, it was an article and then a book that followed by a leading educator researcher. He was saying that the key to raising achievement is connecting students with teachers who support them not just as learners, but also as people. Now, we've known this for years. And paying attention to students' non-academic needs is a key ingredient in schools' efforts to meet today's high academic expectations. Those expectations that we have, even if we're not seeing our kids in person. So it's trying to think about that whole child. Before we start sharing a lot of the practical ideas that we're doing, I'd like us to stop and process real quickly. And in the chat box, think about and then respond to the following. One of the things that we find both for kids and for adults is it's really helpful to make connections between something we know and are familiar with and something new. Well, that's what these two prompts are for. what would be some of the implications of this research in a normal school setting? And then what might be different as we think about remote learning? What do we need to think a little differently about that we may not have had to think about before when we were seeing them every day in person? So take just a few moments and then jot down your thoughts in the group chat and send it to everyone. What would be some of the implications of this research in a normal setting, and then how's that different? What do we need to think about now that may be different than before?
And if you feel like you can only respond to one of those prompts or wish to only respond to one of those, feel free to label them as question 1 or question 2, just so we can track some of the thinking and conversation that is happening here.
Yeah, and Janet, you make a really good point that we can't see their face necessarily. And so that's really going to be a challenge for us to try to still make those connections, even though we may not have that face-to-face as often as we'd like. And Randy, I lost my chat.
Okay. Well, some of the things we're seeing up is, we're seeing come up in the conversation is that what's different is that a lot of learning that is happening is in that home environment. And a lot of you are bringing up that that brings a different set of stressors that I imagine you're alluding to some of the same stressors that Anissa talked about earlier. So one of the challenges we have as adults is knowing we can't eliminate those, but how do we mitigate them and still build those trusting relationships to the best of our ability with the resources and time we have available to us. And Liz, that's an important point and we'll talk some about those daily check-ins and how Liz showing, by the way, that's an important point. We'll talk more about some of those check-ins as our conversation goes on here.
And Nicole, we know that it's hard to reach all the kids. We've always had that issue with the phones not working, the emails not correct, but now it's become so much more critical that we try to find those right numbers or try to figure out how do we get in touch with some of the kids. And Randy's going to talk to us a bit, and we've got a couple of examples of how some other teachers have done that you may have tried, and if not, then it's a new idea. Okay. So Randy, I think I gave you control.
Yeah, control of this particular session. So one thing we want to be cognizant of is we know a lot of webinars out there tend to focus a lot on theory and why you should do certain things, and some of them, depending on their audience and authors, can be a little bit thin on the how. So one thing we want to make sure that all educators walk away from this series is some real practical strategies for implementing these things. Whether you're in a high-tech environment or low-tech environment where students, for whatever variety of reasons, don't have access to internet or devices that would allow them to access internet, or whatever it might be. So our hope is through our next conversation, we'll share some strategies that we have seen both used with some of our partner districts, but also strategies that we've read about in other contexts, so that we can just bring to bear some of those high value practices to you, for you to do with what you see is most appropriate with them. So the first thing we'll want to talk about is, I have control of your screen, it's just not controlling it. There. Nessa, can you give me the slideshow back? Okay. Forgive us for one moment. We had this worked out. There we go. Okay. One thing we know that we can do in sorry, I lost my train of thought. So there's a few strategies available to us, and these strategies come to us courtesy of the American Institutes for Research. And these strategies really fall into 5 broad umbrellas. Um, Creating routines and structures to learn more about how our youth are doing, to share personalized messages that go beyond academic content, to provide opportunities to be open and honest about our current experience, to integrate SEL-focused themes with academic content, and to connect learning to the real world and find some authentic examples and applications of the learning. Really today, we want to focus on that second and third bullet point. We're going to focus on some strategies to help us share personalized messages that go beyond content and providing some opportunities for students to be open and honest. We know that building those connections is important. When students feel connected to us, they feel as though we can trust us as adults. And so that's in our judgment, like I said, where we want to spend some of our thinking here. So the 4 strategies we'll talk about in more detail today are check-in questions, offering personalized feedback to our students, some strategies for office hours, and we'll talk more about what that means in a variety of contexts a little bit later on, as well as using a bunch of other technology, inclusive of pen and paper, to help us communicate with our students. So we'll have a variety of options that we can consider here. So the first thing we want to think about is check-in questions. And for those of you, we know we have a few later arrivals, but for those of you that were here for the initial check-in question, we asked you to think a little bit about and share some about your internal weather for today. It was open-ended and asked you to share whatever you felt comfortable sharing at the time. And as we do in person, when we acknowledge those thoughts, those feelings, those connections, hopefully that is a signal of our commitment to you and to caring for you as educators as our practice continues. Our kids value and need that same connection. So when we have opportunities for them to respond to open-ended prompts about how they're feeling, about their experiences they're having at the time, that's one of the first things we can do to help reconnect with them, especially if we've been out of contact over the past month or so. One thing to note is these check-ins could be synchronous or asynchronous, and we know those terms have been thrown around a lot lately. When we think about synchronous opportunities, we're thinking about things that happen at the same time. So this webinar here, with the exception of those who will be viewing it later in the recorded state, is happening right now at the same time. And we had that check-in right here where we had a chance for all of you to share some thoughts and feelings. But we did not have a chance to necessarily respond to all of you. And that's a very real possibility in these sorts of virtual environments. So we also encourage asynchronous check-ins or check-ins that happen at different times. So not everyone has to be clouded around the room, and I don't have to see this Brady Bunch-like atmosphere directed on the right side of my screen where I have pictures of everyone here. So what we want to think about more is expanding on what those asynchronous opportunities might look like. Those might be written comments, right? So thinking more old school check-in questions, we might offer short postcards to our students or ask them to write short postcards to us, using the information available to us in our student information systems, and to the extent that it's accurate, to check in. We've also talked with some districts who are leaving notes for students or areas for response to students at their food distribution points, where food distribution points are happening in the community. So it's a quick way for you as a teacher to pose a question, and for students to come to those questions and answer them at a time that's convenient for them. As we think about leveraging some of the technology that's available to us, many of you we know are Google schools. So Google Classroom provides you some opportunities to check in via discussion boards or Google Docs. So students might be able to respond to a weekly question or a daily question just to let you know how they're feeling and provide some valuable strategy there. The one thing we can think about is how to leverage some of the learning we're already doing to get a gauge on our students' emotional state as well. One teacher we work with has had posted pictures or prompts at the beginning of their class meetings. And they have asked students, this picture in particular was a picture of a nurse holding a child rather, during the COVID outbreak. And we asked teachers to just respond, or ask students rather, to respond to the thoughts and feelings that they came up for them. And then to later in the lesson to create a narrative based upon that and do a little bit more writing from there.
Yeah, the first three numbers is 706.
But their opportunity to respond to that picture allowed them to surface some of the thoughts and feelings and experiences they were having as a result of living through this epidemic or pandemic the same way we are, and it gave them an academic context for sharing some of those feelings as well. So those check-in questions can be powerful. They can happen at the beginning of class meetings. They happened here. They can be embedded in assignments as we talked about with that teacher. They can be written. We can email to them. And we can also take advantage of our learning management systems to help support that as well. I'm seeing on the right some conversation about emails. In most student information systems where people have provided that contact to the district, that should be available to you. If that information is not available to you, hopefully we'll hit on that a little bit later on in some outside of the box ways that we might get a hold of students or moving forward.
Yeah, and remember guys, if you've got any ideas that percolate as we're talking, go ahead and feel free to write them in the chat and share with other people. All right, Randy, I'm resuming since it's
okay.
Not like you.
It doesn't like me. But I am ready to move forward if you are. The second strategy we can talk about is personalized feedback. And thinking about the context we just shared with check-in questions, it's natural that as educators and people who care for our students would want to respond to them. So if we are providing written postcards or whatnot at a food distribution site, we might also stop by while adhering to social distancing guidelines and offer some written feedback to what our students are leaving us. For those, we might also have the opportunity to leave comments on assignments, whether those assignments are happening within our learning management systems like Blackboard or Google Classroom or what have you, but also in supplementary resources like Newsela or Edpuzzle, where we have the opportunity to interact with students and get some feedback on what they're thinking. We want to stress, though, that we are living in a unique time, and that we don't know that this is true for all of you, but I believe it's true for most of you on the call, that two things have happened in the education world that have not happened to you before. One, you don't have the specter of high-stakes assessment hanging over you in April or May, whenever your high-stakes testing season happens to be. And second, many states and localities are putting an emphasis on providing enrichment opportunities as opposed to moving forward in teaching new things, right? We're trying to shore up what we've done so far to this point in the year, which means that we have a unique opportunity to really engage in some personal goal-setting conversations with our students. And the feedback we offer to them might be on an ongoing draft of a paper that they're revising for clarity or for accuracy or for transitions, and we might help provide them feedback throughout that iterative process. We might also provide feedback on the steps they're using to solve mathematical equations, where we have the opportunity to make their thinking visible. We might provide feedback on a variety of things that is uniquely in this context, that is in some ways less pressure than we've had before, even though the internal struggle of having to do this online or in a remote setting is different. So it is an opportunity to have some of that more personalized instruction and develop some of those goal-setting conversations and provide feedback about how students are progressing toward those goals there. We also know that for some of us who have not yet taken the step to those more personalized goal setting, that in general setting, feedback can be helpful as well, right? If students we know one teacher we're working with is still working on a poetry unit with her students. And you give a lot of ELA and social studies examples because that's my wheelhouse. I work with a lot of ELA and social studies teachers, so forgive me for indulging there. One teacher we're working with is working forward on poetry, and that was where they left off, where the great pause happened, and that's what they're working on now. And the feedback that they're giving them provides that recipe for future action. You know, we could tighten up this stanza a little bit further, or consider adjusting the amount of syllables in this line. They're giving that recipe for future action, which really makes that feedback meaningful for the students to be able to perform well. So all of those are different areas where we could provide some feedback to students. The one last thing we wanted to highlight about feedback is the power of your voice. There are some apps there, and they're listed there. Shobi is one. Your phones have, if you are using smartphones, have native voice recorders as well. And when we can provide some of that verbal feedback to students, and they have a chance to hear your voice, think about the power that has in terms of communicating that Mr. Kendall, for example, took the time out of his day to provide some feedback to me, and I get a chance to see and connect with him again. Even though it's not at the same time, I'm still hearing that adult who's reaching out to me and who cares for me and cares for my progress. And so we stress where possible and where technology allows that voice comments are a really powerful way to not only reinforce that caring aspect with students, but also to give them some meaningful feedback on their work as well.
And Randy, I think that that's such an important piece is I think oftentimes when we think of connecting with kids, we're thinking, okay, I need to send them an email, or okay, we're going to do Google Classroom, or I need to try to see if I can find a number. But just that idea that once we get kids connected, because I see that a lot of the comments in the chat are about, okay, I got to get the kids first. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But once we get the kids connected, having them hear your voice, whether it's the synchronous time in the room or whether it's asynchronous, and like Randy was saying, using those voice comments with feedback can be really, really helpful for the kids because it's a connection with the adult that they trust that they may not, have had for a while.
Are you seeing anything else pop up in chat, Anissa, that you'd like to address, or should we move forward?
There's quite a few people have been talking about, like with Google Classroom, that there's several different ways to do that. So we'll culminate that and pull that together. But a lot of it is about something that you're going to talk about in another slide, Randy, which is how do I try to find the kids? And the fact that we're all in different places. Some people have already started online learning. And some people are still planning for that. So I think for all of us, it's going to be a slow roll to try to find the kids and get them. And it's going to take a concerted effort from the whole district and school to say, how do we get the word out? How do we get the word out in a safe, secure manner of what Google Classroom codes are? How do we make sure that they have the technology? Even if that's just their phone, how do we make sure that they, in some way, shape, or form, can connect with us at least in a limited manner?
Okay. All right. I know I have control of your screen, but I don't want to do it because I've kicked you out of the slideshow every time.
Okay.
Okay. So another thing that's available to us as a strategy is office hours. And we know to a variety of extents, some of you may have these present in your continuity plans and some of you don't, and some of you may not yet because some of these things are still being worked out. So when we talk about office hours and throughout this little blurb here, please remember to always refer to your state and local guidance. Because while we can provide some good advice from out here on the field, we also don't want to get you in trouble by doing things that the state or local authorities might not want you to be engaging in for a variety of reasons. So please be sure to look there first. In absence of that guidance, though, we do want to spend a little bit of time talking about office hours and what they might be used for. So first, they're dedicated blocks of time during the week, whether you're available for 2 hours on a Tuesday or 4 hours on a Friday or whatever that happens to be. It's dedicated blocks of time available for students and parents and or families to connect with you. That connection can look a variety of different ways, right? It can be homework help, times for them to just drop it and get some assistance with some current work. Ms. Pride, I don't understand how to do a quadratic equation. Can you please help me out? So it can be time for that one-on-one tutoring. If you are taking a tack where you are doing some more personalized goal setting, it might also be a time for those goal setting conferences. So marrying the feedback conversation from a few moments ago to the office hours concept here now. But it's also a good supplement, though not replacement, for those informal visits you had in the hall during passing time with students, or those quick conversations you had during recess, or whatever conversations you had during your advocacy period, if that exists for you. It's a time for you to have those brief conversations. Hey, how are you doing? And we might not be able to talk about how you did on the football field Friday night, but we might be able to talk about how are you doing right now and what's your internal weather today, and have some conversations there. One district we're working with has issued a guideline that as part of office hours, teachers do reach out to each of the students they serve at least once a week, or at least students they advocate for in their advocacy periods at least once a week. And they are providing some common themes or some common topics for those check-ins to happen around. So it's not as though those conversations are happening out in the wild and there's no structure to them, right? It's giving them an opportunity for them to have some structured and focused conversation about topics that are important to them and topics that we as a school partner might want to find out more about. Again, though, we want to stress the importance, especially in that last case where we have the more social calls to refer to your state and local guidance, because we know that there are a variety of issues that can come up with that. Where you do have the power, though, to use those office hours for those academic touch bases, though, we highly encourage that.
And Brandy, I'm curious from all of you guys, like, does anybody have office hours set up yet, or have thought about with some of their colleagues or their leadership in terms of what might that look like? You can put in the chat and then I can, and then we can have you talk if you've got a really good idea. Dennis says no. So Dennis, sharing a little bit about what you're thinking of what that might look like. I think you can talk now.
Well, yeah, I got it on. It just took me a second. No, I'm just going to set up some hours for like what you guys were talking about, like 2 hours. Just say, okay, at this time, you can call me up, you can talk to me, and then I'm going to go ahead and put in like homework hours too, because I don't want to be inundated. So what I'm going to probably do is like Monday and Wednesdays do office hours, Tuesdays and Thursdays do homework, have it at the same time, and then Friday maybe a free-for-all. Just to have luck up. Everybody just come in and just group chat, just to visit or something.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Dennis, for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's important to provide some structure to that, to say that this time is available for this purpose. So where you're making that distinction between kind of office hours and homework help is helpful to communicate to folks or to your students and families, so they know when they can communicate to you and for what purposes. It helps to draw some clear boundaries for you, right? But also lets them know when you're available to work with them.
And I've seen a lot of people, Randy, in the chat talking about how they've got an hour or 2 hours, here and there throughout the week to try to vary it. That's the question. Do you vary the time for, the kids, or do you keep it consistent for a routine? And I think that that's something that depends really on your kids, as well as your own schedule. Some schools are creating the schedule themselves so that Mondays may be ELA and social studies, Tuesdays are math science type of situation, where it's completely up to the teacher. So again, it depends on what your school specifically is doing, but somehow having that space available for the kids and the parents to reach out. Ellie, you've got the little kids, so you having the parents involved is very important. But even for our bigger kids, trying not to have the parents be completely out of the loop when we're talking about connecting with the kids. I've seen a couple of people talk about the fact that not all of their kids have technology. And so I'm curious as to whether what conversations may have happened or ideas about how do you have office hours for kids that aren't going to be part of a Google Classroom? Is that, you know, how do you get the word out, and then what do those office hours look like? I don't know if has had those conversations yet or not.
I'm seeing some no's. I see Liz Voltis is talking a little about Google Classroom and Google Meets and how that might be easy, but doesn't necessarily respond directly to your question, Anissa. One thing we have seen some folks do is during office hours we highly do not encourage you to give out your personal phone numbers, but Google Voice is a service that is available to you, and I'll type that in the chat. Google Voice has a service where it gives you essentially a dummy phone number that can be routed to your phone, and distributing that number might be helpful for students to have another way to contact you during your office hours. So that might be another technology service available to you. And again, that depends on your personal comfort level. It's not your personal number, but it's still students being able to call you, right, and call you directly. But that is one option. Again, available depending on your state and local guidance and your personal comfort level for having students be able to contact you during those blocks of time for academic help.
I just wanted to let you guys know that the Text Now app that I mentioned in the chat, you can text and call parents. It's kind of like what you just described. It's just a different thing. It is free also.
Great. Thanks, Ellie.
Thank you.
All right. Ready for me to hit the button, Randy?
I am. Okay. The last thing we want to talk about is, in general, as ways to promote relationships with students, is leveraging other technology. And so there's a variety of different things out there that we might be able to use. Some apps are more specific here. Some of these are more general, and I'll try and go through them in as much detail as I think is appropriate, but please feel free to use the raise hand feature or to ask a question in the chat, and I'm happy to pause and elaborate where I can. So going in order, the first thing that many of you might have been exposed to is Flipgrid. It was started going, I hate to say the word viral, but it started going viral just before this all happened in the education world. And what it is it's a short video communication app where a teacher might be able to pose a question or a short assignment in video form and record themselves using their smartphone. And students are then able to respond within the context of that app to that video. And students are able to respond to their audio, to other students' videos as well. So it gives it an opportunity, an asynchronous opportunity. So at different times, students, so they don't also have to be on their phones at the same time. It gives them an opportunity to still see and hear each other and still feel that sense of belonging and that sense of connection to their classmates that they might not be, well, they certainly aren't getting right now. So that is one option out there to facilitate to simulate some face-to-face conversation and interaction with students. Second option available to us is discussion boards. So depending on the learning management system you use, whether that's Blackboard or Google Classroom or Schoology or Edmodo or whatever it happens to be, those are definitely a place where you can facilitate some school-appropriate, non-content related discussions. That can be a place where you post a weekly check-in question. Tell me about your weather. Tell me about something you're proud of this week. Tell me about something that you worked on this week, or something you worked on for another teacher, or what do you need help with, or what are you worried about, right? Those discussion boards are another way to check in. And again, that check-in doesn't have to happen at the same time, but it's another idea out there that we can take advantage of. Those discussion boards could also have academic uses, right? And where we're asking students to collaborate and problem solve around some very defined or very limited issues for them to work together. So seeing the dual purpose of some of these apps as well. In that third row, apps like Seesaw and Shobi could also be helpful. I like to think of them as LMS light, so to speak. They're not as feature rich, which means they can't do as much as Blackboard or Google Classroom, but they have some kind of niche purposes. Shobi, it was helpful in this, and I attended a webinar on that a few weeks ago. And what we really liked about that is that it has voice recording and annotation built into the app, meaning if I submit a photo of my journal to my teacher can write written feedback directly on a picture of that to me, and I get that right away. My teacher might also provide a voice recorded note directly on that assignment submission to either provide that emotional connection or provide me some feedback on an actual academic assignment as well.
And Randy, the other thing with that is that like those types of apps, even if the kids don't have the tablet or the computer, they more than likely have a phone. And Shobi, it's like SHOWBIE on the screen, Dennis. But if they have Shobi or something like that, like Randy said, they can take a picture of the writing that they did, so they don't have to type it, but they've written it. Take a picture and submit it, and then the teacher can very easily give feedback and send that picture, send it through the app right there. I know that's something that we've heard from quite a few teachers, is trying to figure out other ways that are phone, that there are app. Is it ideal? No. But the kids can still do some reading on the phone and can still do some writing on the phone with some of these different apps or taking pictures and things like that. Sorry, Randy, back to you.
That's okay. Thank you. The other app I want to highlight, especially because I know we have a few elementary folks with us here on the call, is Seesaw. It is, like I said, a little bit lighter in features than like a Blackboard or a Schoology or something of the sort, but it's especially geared toward the K2 grade band, and that's where it's seen most of its audience base, and that's where we've seen it most used. It has many of the same features we just talked about in terms of voice annotation, and able to provide written commentary on that as well. But it's a little bit of a less complex interface for our younger folks to be able to deal with. So if you're in a situation where you're facilitating some distance learning for those, that is something we highly for those students. That is something we highly recommend you taking a look at. So the next bullet point about using social media talks to some of the concerns we've had going on in chat about how we find students and how we connect with them. And we know this isn't within everyone's comfort zone. We know there may be some policies that forbid that. So please take this advice with those 2 grains of salt in mind. But we know that kids are on TikTok. We know that kids are on Instagram. We know they're on Twitter. We know they're interacting with each other. Pardon me. With a variety of social media apps. And so to the extent that it's possible and permissible, where we can create some apps that create some accounts on those apps that are professional as far as we're concerned, but allow us to seek out some of those students and then route them to some of those school appropriate channels. So finding a kid on TikTok and saying, hey, come on over and join me in the Google Classroom, right? Especially for students who might not have working phone numbers or addresses that aren't current. That is one strategy we've seen work with us, seen some educators implement with some success. Does it reach everyone? No, because our kids are, some of our kids are savvy and have privacy settings where it's, where they've limited their search settings, and more power to them, and kudos to them for figuring that out at such a young age. But it does help us cast a little bit wider net and help us get a few more people to our school-sanctioned learning sites.
Yeah, and just really quick, Randy, the advice that we give is, if you think that may be helpful to you, and if you do it, the one thing that the couple teachers who have done it, they created a brand new account that they now have closed or will close shortly, because it was solely to just try to find kids and redirect them, like Randy said. So if they already had a Twitter account, they didn't use that one. Or if they already had an Instagram, they didn't use their personal one. They set up one specifically just to try to hunt down the kids and redirect them. So just be cognizant of that.
Yes, thank you. The last thing we want to be careful to mention is pen and paper is another technology we haven't talked about yet, though we've alluded to it in the in some of the past slides. And so I want to be really explicit in saying that distance learning does not necessarily equal screen time. So it could be, like we mentioned earlier, that you might be writing some postcards and asking students to provide postcards. It could be that, depending on your school's budget availability, that we provide each student with, 5 stamped envelopes that they send back to the school, where they have a chance to write letters to their teachers or to some of their peers, and the school facilitates some of that mailing to mitigate some of those privacy concerns. And again, as we mentioned earlier, some of those written notes or journaling that happen at food distribution sites are another way to keep in contact with parents. And as we go through some additional sessions as well, we'll highlight different ways that pen and paper can still be used to great effect within this new world that we find ourselves in. But we wanted to be careful to say that, especially with some of our schools where we know students don't have a great access to technology or internet or so on and so forth. We want to be mindful of providing some of those options to you and bringing that conversation to the forefront, because we know lots of free stuff is getting thrown at you in terms of technology that you might be able to use. Where we have seen a gap is, how do we serve the kids who can't yet access that, or at least can't regularly access that? And that's really where we see ourselves thinking with you as this situation continues to unfold. With that said, I do see a question on the side, and Liz Voltis, I don't know if that question is for us or for Patrice, who's talking about Screencastify, but that is a great way to use Screencastify. I have personally done that in some of my own practice, to have, to illustrate some of your own webinars or your own lessons, and then to have some brief check-in points throughout the way. So that is a innovative way to think about that, and where we can think about some ways to combine and use all this technology we have available. That's some great thinking there. Okay, so I'm ready to move on if you are, Anissa.
Yes, there's a question of where to find Screencastify.
Okay.
Dennis, is that?
I'm sorry, were you taking that, or you want me to take that, Anissa?
Nope, you can take it. I was just making sure. I was understanding.
Yep. So Screencastify.com, I believe, does provide free accounts. Those free accounts allow you unlimited recordings of 10-minute sessions. So if you have 10 minutes or no more than 10 minutes that you want to record a lecture, or you want to record a PowerPoint on your screen for students to view, that's a great way to do that. Some things to be mindful of when using that is that for students to view those videos, they need a space where they can view them. So you might be able to upload them to a Google Classroom, but that can be sort of a lengthy process in terms of uploading. So other teachers have uploaded them to professional YouTube accounts. So they have a static link, and they can relink those videos over time. So even if you're not in a situation where you have to do virtual learning next year, pardon me, you can reuse the video for enrichment purposes or for teaching next year, right? So that's one of the things we want to keep in mind as well, is if we are taking time to create resources this year, to think about how they can be of use in future years and not just in this situation. So if you're going the screencasting route, creating your own personal YouTube channel might be something to consider.
All right. And as Randy said, we know that we're all being inundated with free, this is free, or try this for free for a limited time only. So things like Newsella and the New York Times has a whole area of student-friendly pieces where kids can read. You can select articles for them to read. They can respond to it, and then you can respond to them. So another way of connecting with it that's outside of the Google Classroom per se, and again, something that they may be able to do on their phone if they don't have the tablet or the computer device yet. So, all right, Randy.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about some strategies, and like I said at the outset of my little spiel here, that we wanted to give some things that were practical for you to be able to use in the near future, of course with some thought about how it makes sense for you in your context, but we wanted to make sure that you were able to leave today with some practical strategies that you could put into practice in your own distance learning. So we want to hear a little bit about what you're thinking about what's been shared so far today. And so we have 3 questions for you. I will ask you, as you respond to any or all of them, to go ahead and type Q1, Q2, or Q3 in the chat as you think about them. But the 3 things we want you to think about is which of these strategies or variations of them might you already be experimenting with, and tell us a little bit about that. You might also tell us a little about which of these seem doable in the near future. So, for example, you might feel a little bit like making your own YouTube or Screencastify might be a little bit far away, or writing check-in postcard might be a little more doable in the near future. So tell us what you see about as some next steps for you. And for question 3, what seems like something to aspire to? What's that thing that might happen in a month or so from now as you get your feet wet and you get your legs under you in this new world that we find ourselves in?
And Randy, I'm seeing a lot of starting office hours, which I think is great because that just gives the kids, as well as the parents, just a time where they know that you're available and they can check in with you. And I know Google Classroom is new to some of us, so hopefully there's enough, hopefully there's at least a couple people on your campus that have experience. And Michael, I believe that there are for sure at your campus that can help you if you get stuck. Tim, that's a really interesting idea about having a route for home delivery, kind of like home delivery of the newspaper or something for your kids that don't have access to the internet so that they can still review and maintain where they are in the learning. And we're seeing a couple professional YouTube account, which I think is really important because that some of the districts that we've talked to are really concerned about security, especially with people taking advantage and being goof and trying to horn in on people's, not Google Classroom, that's very secure, but on Zoom and such like that. So having a professional YouTube account, something that's very secure, is a really good idea. And Dennis, if you have any questions about Shobi, let us know. Not that Randy and I are experts, but we did sit in on the founder of Shobi as he did it with us. So we can kind of share a couple of things that we learned from him if you're interested. And there's another oldie but goodie, Remind. Yes, if you have Remind set up, that's another good way to get the word out to kids. Again, it's on the phone. You can do it with kids and with parents to remind them. All right. So Q&A, we have a couple of questions or a couple of minutes if there's any questions that anybody has. That you haven't put in the chat. And you can probably unmute yourself, I believe. So if you want to ask the question, feel free, or if you want to type it in the chat, you can do that as well. All right, well, you guys know how to get a hold, but we'll email you with the resources that were shared, along with a couple of other resources that are free. Again, trying not to inundate you, but just to make sure that we're helping support each other through this and not having to everybody reinvent wheels. So with that said, the last thing that we have done, Randy is putting in a feedback survey link in the chat window. And what we will ask all of you guys to click on that. It allows us to track attendance. So for any of you that would like to have a certificate in June for any of the webinars that you come to, we can give you PL hours for that. And then the other thing is the first thing that the survey will ask you is the exit ticket. So we would just like to hear from you guys some of the great things that you've been doing during the school closure that makes you proud. Some things that you have had success with, either in connecting with kids or getting your Google Classroom set up or whatever that might be. And Randy, there's a question about, do you click on the link? So you should be able to click on it, or do you have to? It should be live, but it doesn't look like it's live.
Correct. So within the chat, the link isn't clickable, but you are certainly able to copy and paste it into a browser window. Okay.
All right. So that we practice ahead of time, guys. So if you guys don't mind doing that, we really appreciate it. You're so welcome. We're glad that you guys could make it. We really want to try to take advantage of having schools from across the country so that we can continue to share ideas and to continue being a support for y'all. We've got other sessions coming up, so feel free to register for any of them. If there's anywhere you can't make it but you're interested in it, let us know, and we do the recording of it as well as any of the resources and ideas that are shared that come from that.
How do I get to the link?
Randy, do you want to explain again how to do the link?
I will paste the link here into the chat. If you copy that and paste that into your browser, so Google or Firefox or whatever it might happen to be, that will take you to the survey and allow us to track your attendance so we can get you that certificate at the end of the school year.
And as always, we want your feedback because it'll also ask you for any other ideas that you have, any other suggestions for topics.
I'm old school. I forgot. How do I copy and how do I paste it up to the browser? I'm serious.
No worries.
Huh?
So starting at the link, go ahead and drag your mouse, click and drag your mouse over it, and that should highlight the link.
It didn't.
And from there, you can control C.
It didn't highlight it. I'm clicking on the link and it's not highlighting it. There, okay.
So I heard the okay. I don't know if that means it's highlighted now or not.
Okay, it's highlighted.
You know what
now.
What else we can do, guys, is if anybody is unable to do it right now, we can send the link to you in immediately following this, so that you can just click on it from there.
Will it be an email?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, just real quick. So I got it highlighted. What would I do now to paste?
So hit Control and C at the same time. That will copy it to your clipboard, and then Control V in your web browser will get you to the link.
I better do it the other way. I don't know how to do it. I got to practice it.
Okay, that's fair. We'll send along an email message shortly.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, guys. If anybody has any questions and they want to hang around and ask, you can. If not, thank you all so much. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you at another one of these. Have a great evening.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks, Deborah.
Okay.
Thank you, Anessa.
No problem. Thanks, Liz.
Bye and be good. Take care.
Bye.
Jennifer,
Stay
you
safe.
too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So Dennis, or Robert.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.